Two Cat Kitchen. It's time for us to pitch in and start another Two Cat show. Down at the Two Cat Kitchen, we're starting on a mission to put you in the culinary know. We've got the finest recipes you ever will find, guaranteed to show you all a mighty fine time here at the Two Cat Kitchen. Time for a new edition of the Culinary Two Cat Show. The Culinary Two Cat Show.
Welcome to the Two Cat Kitchen, the show that mixes musical mayhem with culinary calamity. Rick McKinney is here to help with the mixin'.
Hey everybody, welcome to the kitchen.
Each episode features new songs, a brand new recipe, and a special guest. Who's our guest today?
You know, we're at the halfway point of the season, which means we have a special science guest. Today, we're joined by Martina Muller. Martina is a wildlife biologist specializing in bird behavior, and she's going to be telling us all about her exciting research.
Every show also includes an informative segment. What do we have for the people today?
Today, we have a segment taking a look at endangered species conservation, and we'll be joined by another guest, Alex Thiboutot, who will help us answer some questions about endangered species. Speaking of which, I can hear that the Coconotes are back, but do you know what they're up to?
Well, they learned how to make apple pie on last month's episode, so they are in there fighting over the last piece.
Wow, it's fighting over the leftovers.
Yep.
That sounds like the Coconotes to me. Well, if you can round them up, Sarah, it's time for our first musical number, and it's a world premiere of the Chorale Catasy. We're back at the Two Cat Kitchen, and we're here with today's guest. We have Martina Muller. Martina, welcome to the Two Cat Kitchen.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's great. Martina is a research scientist, and she works in our wildlife ecology, and also is teaching full-time here at the University of Rhode Island, here in Southern Rhode Island. And so, Martina, tell us a little bit about what are you working on research-wise right now?
So I'm in the Department of Natural Resource Sciences, and it's a pretty broad department. And the people I'm working with, we're studying birds, and we're studying the distribution and abundance of coastal waterbirds in Rhode Island. So we're a tiny state, but we have a lot of coastline, and we have the largest natural estuary in New England, just like a big bay in our state. That's a really important area for ducks and geese in the winter. They like to spend the winter here in our coastal waters. And it's also just important habitat for other groups of water birds throughout the year. There's little islands where they breed. And so a lot of birds pass through here in migration. So it's just important habitat for water birds. And one of the questions we're asking is, how do water birds interact with shellfish farms? So Rhode Island's also increasingly an important place for shellfish aquaculture, especially oysters. If you want to eat fresh oysters, Rhode Island's a great place to come.
Yeah.
And more local farmers are growing oysters in our coastal waters using different methods, but it's just really not known how birds interact with that. And so that's one of the things we're looking at is, how does that impact the birds' distribution and abundance? And also, how does the birds present impact farm operations? Because, birds can impact those in various ways as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I know that here in Rhode Island, like you said, they've made a real big effort to promote aquaculture, I guess they call it, right? Mm-hmm. Of different types. And I guess in other coastal areas they do aquaculture too, I'm sure, but it does seem like it seems to be a bit of a priority here in Rhode Island. So it would seem like really important to know how that aquaculture would affect birds that spend part of their life here. Is it good for them, bad for them, right? That's the whole idea,
yeah, pretty
right?
much, yeah.
And then I guess if you're growing oysters or mussels or whatever, if there's birds, I know there's ducks that eat mussels, right?
Absolutely.
So if the ducks are eating all of your farmed mussels, that's not a good thing.
Not a good thing at all.
Okay, so that's really interesting
Mm-hmm.
and important research. That's great. And so, but I know that a little bit from talking to you that's not really totally your line of research. How did you come about? Well, let me just ask you, how did you get into this line of research in general?
Yeah, it's been a long and winding road. So I'm actually a graduate from this department. So 20 years ago, I graduated with a degree in wildlife conservation biology from this school, this department. So it's cool to be back home. But after I graduated, actually what happened is I just went traveling in Central America and didn't have a plan at all after graduation. And then when I came back, realized all the field jobs were gone. But then luckily chanced upon a field job in the Galapagos Islands, studying Nazca boobies and albatrosses, because unfortunately another field technician had a rock climbing accident, so they needed to fill the position really quickly.
I can't believe it. People would love to work down in the Galapagos, and you got to do it. Wow.
Yeah. So I got super lucky, and it was 8 months living in a tent on an uninhabited island with just a few other scientists, and I was just spending all my days in this huge seabird colony, walking around. And in the Galapagos, as you probably know, animals aren't afraid of humans. So it's just like a huge data farm, and you're just hanging out with the birds, and they pretty much ignore you and don't care that you're there. So you're just sort of surrounded by this big soap opera of breeding birds going about their lives with all their drama and rearing their chicks, and there's life, there's death, all happening around you, and you're just immersed in it. So that got me really hooked on animal behavior and seabirds especially.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of drama in the seabird colony.
Absolutely.
I don't even think of that.
Yeah, actually.
There's a lot of fights and stuff?
Definitely. And I ended up turning that into my master's project. And one of the questions I was researching was looking at the cycle of violence. So what happens is Nazca boobies, they're very long-lived seabirds. So it takes them actually a few years to actually start breeding.
Actually, let me just say, what was that? It's a species of bird.
It's a seabird.
What is it called again?
A Nazca boobie. And they're relatively like mid to large sized seabirds. Like a couple of kilograms. So around the equator, the Galapagos Islands, there's like blue-footed boobies, which many people may have heard of, Nazca boobies, red-footed boobies.
Got it. All right, sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
And they're prone to violence.
They're prone to violence. And so, like, these non-breeders hang around the colony, so they're not quite ready to breed yet, but they're sort of, like, looking at other breeding adults, trying to figure out, like, what they do. And so they kind of, like, walk around the breeding colony where there's just, like, nests on the ground, packed quite closely. And then so when the adults are out foraging for fish at sea, leaving their chicks unattended in the nest, these non-breeders will actually approach those unattended chicks and like attack them, or they do like pseudo-parental behavior where they kind of preen them and like pretend that they're the parent, and sometimes they try to copulate with them. So they're doing all kinds of weird stuff to these chicks.
Yeah.
And so interestingly, we had histories of these individuals because this is like a long-term study. So the professor I was working with, Dave Anderson, he's at Wake Forest University. I think he just retired a couple years ago, but he had a very long-term study where he knew the histories of every single banded bird in this part of the study area. And so he knew what they experienced as young chicks. And so these non-breeders, we could figure out, the birds that are harassing chicks the most, did they have some kind of traumatic experience in their like chickhood? So we could look back in the records and found that the ones that were most aggressive and violent to the chicks actually had experienced more violence like that when they were young.
You're
so it's
kidding.
kind of quite parallel to what we see in like human populations. So that was a kind of surprising and unexpected result. And they're a sibblicidal species, so the older chick will always kill the younger chick because parents can't afford to rear both. So there's really a lot going on with the boobies.
So what kind of species?
Sibblicidal. So
Sibblicidal.
Siblings will kill each other. Yeah, the older sibling
crazy.
will always kill the younger sibling if both eggs hatch.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, so there's never a dull moment.
So, and there's lots of bad boobies around.
Very bad.
Wow. That is crazy. Wow, that sounds like a fascinating research.
Yeah, I was hooked on behavior after that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
This is too good.
I know. So that's great. So you spent some time down in the Galapagos, and which is fascinating. But you also spent time over in Europe, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know. I was sitting in class one day during grad school, and I got it in my head that I wanted to do my PhD in Europe. And I'm originally from Europe, and I just thought, okay, I want to live in Europe for a while and do research there. And there were some. It's actually a great place for animal behavior research. There's just like a lot of really cool stuff going on. And I was determined to work with someone who was studying sort of hormones and behavior in free-living birds. I didn't really want to work with captive birds. And so that kind of narrowed the scope. And I ended up getting in touch with someone in the Netherlands and got a Fulbright grant to go work with him for a year, and then ended up staying on to do my PhD there. And then I did like field work with kittiwakes in Arctic Norway and in Iceland. For that project, I worked with shearwaters in Italy during my vacations for fun. So I got to kind of experience different seabird colonies in Europe during that time, which was really fun.
So you lived in the Netherlands for a while.
Yeah, for 5 years.
Wow. That's great. What was that like?
It's great.
Were you in a city or?
Yep. I was living in Groningen, which is a smallish city in the northeast. So it's not really in the big hub of like Amsterdam, Leiden, The Hague, all of those cities, which are more on the west and all kind of tightly connected. It was sort of like a standalone city in the northeast, sort of surrounded by a lot of farmland and about an hour away from Germany. But very Dutch, just biking everywhere, very flat, windy, but great place to study. Actually, one of the kind of founders of the field of animal behavior, Nico Tinbergen, who won a Nobel Prize for it, he was at the University of Groningen, and his grandson was a professor in our ecology group. So that lineage was very much there, and it was a very kind of stimulating place with a lot of people from all over the world studying there and also coming in to give talks, collaborating. It was very stimulating.
Wow, that sounds like a great experience.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And actually, so you were born in Europe too, and we're going to get to that in 1 second. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So, Martina, we were talking about how you were born in Europe. Where were you born?
I was born in Basel, Switzerland.
Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's an interesting place to live. And you lived there for a little while?
About a year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then where did you end up? Your parents moved, I guess?
So my dad's a physicist, and he was a postdoc at that time. And so he got a 1-year fellowship from the Swiss National Science Foundation to come to the U.S. to do research for a year.
Yeah. And where did he end up in the U.S.?
So he was actually working at URI for a year, and then he got another postdoc in Long Island for 2 years, so we stayed 2 more years, and we were going to go back to Switzerland, but then he got a job at URI, so we stayed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I grew up here.
So you were born in Switzerland, but you basically grew up
here, yeah.
New England or in the U.S., right?
Rhode Island, yeah.
Oh, cool. That's really interesting. But you still have family in Switzerland?
Yeah. We visited all the time.
Yeah. And you spent a lot of time there, I bet, as, visiting and...
Yeah, absolutely. And my dad even did a 6-month sabbatical there when I was in 6th grade, so I got to go to school there. And I'm still very close to family there.
And one thing I know, I don't know a lot about Switzerland, but I do know that people that live there speak a lot of languages.
Yes.
Do you speak a lot of languages, or you must?
Yes, so we speak Swiss German at home, so it's a Swiss dialect of German. It's not actually a written language. In school, you learn like proper High German, what they speak in Germany, but we have like our own Swiss dialect. And then my parents got me a French tutor and a German tutor, and then I just had an interest in languages and traveled a lot, so I picked up other languages along the way.
Wow. That's great. I think it's so great to be able to speak different languages. And there's different types of German. I didn't realize that. I guess just a dialect, right? But if you go to Germany, people can understand what you're saying pretty much?
It depends. So there are pockets in southern Germany where they also have a strong dialect, and there's more overlap between that dialect and Swiss dialect, so they kind of understand more. But then when you get to like northern Germany, they understand less and less. Okay.
Now, how about when you were in the Netherlands, that you had to speak Dutch there?
Yeah. So
is that something that you already learned, or?
I think I started taking some Dutch lessons or something, but I realized everyone spoke such outstanding English there because none of their TV is dubbed into Dutch. Unlike in Germany, where all the TV shows and movies are dubbed into German, in the Netherlands, everything is in English with subtitles. So their English is like outstanding. Plus, I was in a very international university, so I kind of got by with faking Dutch. So I would speak Swiss German with a Zurich accent and mix in some German, like High German, and some English, and it sounded just like Dutch.
No kidding. That's awesome. Yeah. And of course, everybody that lives there probably speaks multiple languages anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Communication wasn't a problem.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So anyway, that's really an interesting past you have there, which is great. Very diverse. And so getting back to, you did your PhD, I guess, in the Netherlands. And where did you move? Where'd you end up going from there?
So after that, I don't know, there were just like other research questions I had and other parts of the world I wanted to experience. So it worked out that I connected to a professor in Japan who was doing really interesting work with streak shearwaters, and he just had access to all these very cool instruments that they put on birds. So he puts cameras on birds and does like films of them flying and looking at what they eat when they dive, what kinds of fish they eat. He puts all kinds of GPS loggers on them to track their movements, even some like physiology recordings, like heart rate loggers. So that seemed really cool to me because I wanted to study their behavior in the wild, not in a controlled setting. So I got a fellowship to go from the Japanese Society of Science, or whatever it's called, to go do research with him for a few years.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. I mean, putting cameras on birds, I know that's what people do. I mean,
yeah, it was pretty funny because one of them actually flew to North Korea, and I'm like, I think we're on to something.
Wow.
So I was working at Nagoya University. So Nagoya is a fairly large city of about 3 million, definitely the biggest city I ever lived in. And so it's kind of like southeast Japan, between Tokyo and Kyoto, very roughly.
Okay.
But I was doing field work in the Sea of Japan. So that's on the other side of Japan, sort of tucked between like mainland Asia and Japan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
and I was
you
working
got-
an island there.
Yeah, so you got to see a bunch of the country and everything, and
Yeah.
going back and forth, I imagine.
Yeah.
That's great. Wow, really interesting work. And then after Japan, you ended up.
After Japan, I thought about doing another postdoc in Europe, but then I thought, okay, I think I need a break. Then I thought about traveling the whole world on cargo ships. And so I got a lot of vaccinations, and then I realized I was too tired for that too, and I was just kind of homesick.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just needed a break because I had just been doing like hardcore, like research first for many years, and missed my family and wanted to. I was also, I'd been working on seabirds for like 10 years by then, and I just saw that so many of the seabird populations I was working on were really doing terribly, actually. Like, seabirds are really vulnerable to climate change, and I had seen so many direct impacts of climate change on the birds, from like heat waves on like causing like whole breeding colonies to collapse in Argentina, to just like puffins not being able to get their food in Iceland, to like typhoons destroying nest burrows in Japan, and I mean just so many different ways that climate is impacting seabirds. And so I don't know, I felt like pivoting and sort of getting involved with climate advocacy for a while, because I thought that might have a more direct impact rather than me just studying behavior for fun and then like 4 people are going to read the paper.
Yeah. I see. So you did kind of get involved in climate advocacy for a bit?
Yeah. So here in Rhode Island, I got involved in it for a while.
Oh, okay. That's good.
And then realized I missed being a scientist, and so I started doing work here at the university, which I already told you about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So a really varied past.
Yeah.
And a very interesting route to end up here, which is great. So what I wanted to ask you now, can you just give us a sense, like what a day in the life of a research scientist like you is like? You know what I mean? Pick one of those research topics and what kind of like if you're doing some field work, for example. Is that a fair question?
Sure. Yeah. Gosh, I mean, they were, every place is different. But
like, does something stick out in your mind? Like, oh yeah, we had to go out on a.
I can tell you about what I was doing in Japan because it's sort of unusual.
Yeah.
So I actually had 4 full summers of field work there, and I was working with streak shearwaters in like a big colony, and they're sort of like unusual because most seabird colonies are sort of like open. There's not really any vegetation because there's just so much bird poop everywhere that like not much can grow there, and it's just kind of like barren rocks, nests. But this area was different. It was sort of almost like lush jungle on this island, and the birds would like be breeding in nest burrows they dig in the ground under trees. And so they kind of like crash into the trees and then land, and then they find their little nest burrow and go to their chick. And they would spend the days foraging, and then at night they would be in the breeding colony feeding their chicks and spending time with them. And so I did all my work at night. So I would like eat dinner with our research group on the island, and then we'd all get suited up with our field gear and then head over to the colony, and I would spend all night working in the field, like in the breeding colony from like 8 to 4 a.m.
So were you doing like observations of them, or?
Yeah. So I was putting heart rate loggers on them and looking at their stress sensitivity. And so I was doing behavioral observations with infrared cameras in the dark, and I would film their behavior while I had heart rate loggers on them. And so I would like also take blood samples in the dark from them to look at their stress hormones. So there was just like so much stuff, and I'm like crawling around on my hands and knees in the dark, and I knew all the little paths so I wouldn't mess up the nests. They were all like labeled. I knew every single bird band and the name of every bird, and I was just this kind of like feral animal crawling around all night, every night for about 4 months.
And so you had to catch the birds to put the monitors on them and to take the blood.
Yeah.
How tricky was that? I mean...
that's a great question. So for these birds, usually the easiest thing was to just reach my arm into their nest burrow, because I knew that was their home and that was where their chick was. And so I knew that reliably I could find one parent there. So I would reach in, and then the animal would chomp down on my finger with its bill, and then I would grab the bill and gently pull the animal out of the burrow. And then I would stick the head into like a cloth bag to kind of keep the head immobilized, keep it from biting me, and then I could work on the bird. And I usually was like attaching a heart rate logger, taping it to the back with tape, attaching the electrodes to the chest, and then I would put the bird back in the nest burrow, and then I would put an Nalgene bottle in the entrance, a Nalgene bottle full of water, so that the bird would just like stay in the nest and it wouldn't escape with my instruments on.
Oh, because you want to get it back?
Yeah, and I wanted to look at the sort of the profile of the heart rate during a stress response and how quickly it returns to normal, because I noticed that some birds are really chill and they're like pretty much unruffled, like stressful things can happen, but they don't really sweat it. And then other ones are just really anxious and they stay anxious. And so it's very much like humans. They have temperaments, they have personalities.
Wow.
And some are just more stress sensitive than others. And that's also reflected in their behavioral responses. So that was kind of like one of the questions I was looking at.
Yeah, okay. So this is, you stick your hand in this burrow and the bird bites you.
Yep.
And that's how you catch them. I don't know.
And you can always tell from the bite if it's a male or a female, because the males had huge bills.
There's something about that, I guess.
Yeah, well, you can see it. I have scars all over my arms from penguins, albatrosses, boobies, shearwaters. It looks like I have emotional problems, but really it's just scars from the birds.
So you got to give it up to study these birds, I guess, huh? You got to give up your hands and things.
Yeah, but it's all, nothing was, I mean, yeah, it's just part of the wear and tear of being a field biologist. And, we wear these scars proudly.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, that's really interesting. And it's fascinating that the birds would have different temperaments and everything. I wouldn't think about that, but yeah.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, anyone who has dogs know that they have very kind of unique and individual personalities. Anyone who has any kind of pet knows that.
Yeah.
And it's no different with wild animals. There's a whole spectrum. And there's a whole like field of animal behavior research focused on animal personality now, from invertebrates to all kinds of vertebrates.
Wow.
Yeah, people study in spiders.
Spider behavior.
Yeah. And personality. So there's
yeah.
consistent differences in individuals in sort of behavioral strategies or behavioral syndromes. And there's some genetic basis, some of it's developmental. It's interesting. And I was interested in sort of like the hormonal underpinnings and also like the autonomic nervous system. So stress responses, like the fight or flight response.
Well, it sounds like you've had some really fascinating experiences in the field. And with that in mind, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back. We're back at the Two Cat Kitchen. And Martina, one thing that we ask everybody who's a guest on the Two Cat Kitchen is, what is your earliest musical memory?
I can't remember a specific memory, but my mom's a piano teacher, and as long as I can remember, she was always practicing the piano. And she would have students come to our house, even when I was very little, and she would teach lessons there. And then I think by the time I was 3, I insisted on lessons, and I would just constantly be at the piano. She would just park the high chair in front of the piano. And one of my favorite early memories of making music with my mom on the piano is what we called the Three Little Pigs and the Wolf. And we would just play on the black keys of the piano and improvise, and it was call and response. And we would just do improvisations and have like a little musical conversation about the story of the wolf and the three little pigs.
That's great.
Yeah.
What a great memory.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Wow. So, and then you are involved in music a little bit, right? I think you sing a little bit right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I learned piano when I was little, but as you know, I traveled a lot, so I could never really take it with me. And I always really loved singing with other people. And so I found a choir when I came back home here and started singing in a church choir first locally here in Peacedale with the Unitarians. And then I found a really good Episcopal choir in Newport with really great choir directors. And we sing a lot of early music, and it's just some of my favorite thing ever.
Wow, that's great. So you are active in music too? Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Fantastic.
Yeah, my whole family's musicians and scientists.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's quite a history of that throughout time, I guess. So that's a good thing. Yeah, I'm just curious, your mom being a piano teacher, did she play a lot other than teaching? Did she play a lot when you were younger at home? What kind of music did she play?
All kinds of classical music, a lot of Bach. I remember like early in my life just hearing her practicing a lot of Bach, and I love Bach, but also Mozart and just all kinds of classical music. It was really nice. And my brother plays violin, and so there was always like music happening in the house. And my other brother is a professional jazz musician now, and so I'm still like immersed in it. And I live with him, so our house looks like a music store.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, so you are kind of, I guess, definitely a musical family on one side and a science family on the other side, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I remember in high school, we used to have family singing meetings, and it was really annoying to me because I just wanted to talk to my friends on the phone, but I was like, I have to go sing with my family.
You're kidding?
Yeah, it's very Swiss, because the Swiss always sing. When I was going to school in Switzerland, we would every day sing songs together. Everyone had a songbook, and we would sing several songs, and it was like my favorite part of the school day.
Great. Well, okay, so we're going to wrap up this part of the episode, and we're going to move on, and I think you have a recipe for us.
Yeah. So when you asked me for a recipe, I'm not like a very good cook, but one of the things I remember, it's been a hot summer, and I got really back into the foods I really liked eating in Japan in summer, because in Japan the summers are just really hot and humid like they are here. And so they're really good with like cold noodles. And I remember in the field, sometimes we would have somen, which is like a very thin noodle that they actually put like ice on, and it's just like so refreshing. And that's not even the recipe, but I just that kind of got me into like Japanese food this summer again. And then one of my staples that I always cooked there was okonomiyaki. And it's basically, so that's the recipe I'm going to tell you about.
Okay,
it's super simple.
Yeah, hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We're back at the Two Cat Kitchen. Martina, you have a recipe for us. What is it?
It's okonomiyaki.
Okonomiyaki.
Mm-hmm.
I like the sound of it.
I can break down the word for you because I looked it up on Wikipedia before I came. So konomo means favorite, and then you add an O to anything to make it sound more polite, which the Japanese are really into, is making everything polite. And then yaki, the last part of the word, means grilled. So it means like basically your favorite grilled stuff.
Your polite favorite grill.
Your polite favorite, exactly.
Excellent.
And it's fairly simple. That's what I like about it. It's very flexible. So they make it differently in different parts of Japan. But basically you can kind of put your favorite leftovers in there, mixed with maybe some noodle or some shredded cabbage. some egg, and you kind of just turn it into a pancake, and then you put condiments on it. So that's basically the concept.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's just like always satisfying and delicious, but you kind of only need to make one bowl dirty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's like simple to make.
Yeah.
But the way I like to make it is kind of like a healthy way. I just shred some cabbage or chop it finely, and then I dust it with some salt and pepper and some whole wheat flour, just like a tablespoon. You can put more if you want it to be a little hardier. And just
this is like a typical bowl, like a kitchen bowl.
Put it all in a kitchen bowl, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And you can put like, a solid like large 2 handfuls of cabbage in, because it all kind of like wilts.
Yeah.
And then kind of just coat it, and toss it together, and then add maybe 2 or 3 eggs, and just mix it all together, and then add whatever leftovers you have. It can be like seafood or meat or veggies. You could add some like other shredded veggies, like shredded carrot or some bean sprouts or whatever you want. And then you just basically fry it up in a pan into like kind of a pancake form. Better to do it kind of at lower heat so the cabbage can cook through. You can also put noodles in, like some parts of Japan, like in Hiroshima, they put a lot of grilled like noodles in as well. And then when that's done, then you can add any kind of sauce or topping to it you want.
And it fries up like a pancake type deal, right?
Yeah.
Because you put some flour in with the cabbage and then eggs too.
Yeah.
So
and
that's how it sticks together. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can like play with the proportions. Like some people want it to be more low carb and like more eggy, and some people want it to be more pancake like and add more flour.
Oh, okay.
So you can just do whatever suits you. It's like super flexible.
Wow.
It's like you don't even really need like measurements.
Fantastic. That's an ideal recipe for the Two Cat Kitchen, because we're not big on measurements here.
Great.
And,
Me too. And you can do it in the field. You can do it at home. You basically don't need anything.
And you just fry it in a pan.
And then you flip it and then fry it on the other side.
Yeah.
Just the extent that you want it to be like cooked through,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then in Japan, of course, they have like all kinds of cool sauces they put on. They'll put like even some like Japanese mayonnaise or some dried fish flakes, or some pickled veggies. I used to make a really good like cashew, like a vegan cheese sauce, because cheese is really expensive in Japan. And so
Really?
I found a vegan cheese recipe made out of nutritional yeast and cashews and lemon juice and garlic. And I would make like a big batch of that sauce and slather it on, maybe throw an avocado on it. So it could go like breakfast or dinner or a snack. It's very versatile.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. That's great. Wow, what a great dish. Yeah. That's not something you see here in the U.S. very much, I don't think.
No, and it's super practical.
Yeah. Okonomiyaki. Mm-hmm. Wow. All right, we'll have to keep that in mind. Thanks for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for being a guest on the Two Cat Kitchen with us.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really fun.
We're back at the Two Cat Kitchen, and we're joined by Alex Thiboutot. Alex, thanks for joining us here in the Two Cat Kitchen.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Alex is a student at the University of Rhode Island and is a major in environmental science and management, just about to graduate.
Yippee!
Yeah. And so your environmental science, it's kind of a overarching major, I guess. So do you have any kind of specialty that you get into within that? Or
I've done a couple summer research internships and fellowships that I've enjoyed a lot. I did one that was more aquaculture centered and one that was more land centered. I did one about ticks, and then I did one about brook trout, which are 2 totally different things, but I did enjoy them both equally. So I'd say I like the environment and how all the pieces fit together, and how lots of things come together to make an environment, and that at any scale you can look at, all the pieces fit together a little bit.
So, and talking about some research experiences that you've had, I know that you did something this past summer. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It was something to do with something called eDNA, which I don't know a lot about. So, and I bet a lot of the listeners don't either.
Yeah, so I went up to Maine, specifically Orono at the University of Maine, And for 10 weeks, I studied environmental DNA, which I like to think about it as humans shed skin cells, and animals do something very similar. And all of that, all the cells that they shed, like scales from fish and all that, and just being in an environment, you shed DNA. And that's what we had went out and collected. So I used different tools to collect surface water and also deeper water from a lake that we had studied. And in that, we performed DNA extractions, which involved a lot of steps of moving around tiny amounts of very clear liquid that looked like water. And then eventually, after all those steps were completed, we had an eDNA sample. So in our tube was just suspended DNA that we got to test, and we were looking specifically for brook trout, which we had placed in the water so that we could learn about where their eDNA was in that lake.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I thought it was super cool. So
Yeah.
I specifically compared the surface water to the deep water sampling to see when or how it moved around up there too, and found some really interesting stuff. It's been a minute since I've presented this, but we found surface level DNA 3 weeks after the fish were removed from a lake, which I thought was crazy because
Wow.
eDNA, all DNA, is really susceptible to UV radiation, heat, just general temperature changes. Really anything can ruin a piece of DNA, honestly.
So like sunlight. In particular,
Sunlight's a big one.
Yeah.
And then when we first started my experiment, we found no eDNA in the deeper water.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. So you have to be able to figure out which DNA belongs to the trout. That's hard enough, I would think, but not
they
these
have
days,
like
maybe.
they have I forgot what it's called, but it's like a little it lights up inside the machines that we use, so it can tell the machine, I have DNA that matches the thing that I'm looking for, and I'm going to glow green, and you're going to see me and write about it.
That is so crazy, man. I mean, back in the day, that just even thinking about that was not even possible. It's so amazing how complex things have become, or how good these techniques have become. And it sounds like, so the whole, if I get this right, the idea behind your project, you put the trout in the lake, and there wasn't any trout there before.
Right.
Because eventually you want to go maybe somewhere where there are trout naturally, and you want to know what to look for, essentially.
Yeah, the end goal is to be able to count how many fish are in the lake without physically going, like, using other techniques that are sometimes inaccurate and very expensive to do to count the fish.
Wow.
So hopefully one day, with the help of this research that me and my grad student I worked with conducted, we'll be able to count how many fish are in the water.
That is so awesome, because it might sound like a simple thing to count the number of fish.
It's so
but
important, yeah.
Absolutely incredibly difficult, probably impossible in many ways. Wow, that's great. Wow, that's really interesting. So you're, as I mentioned, you're about to graduate, and what happens next? Do you have anything going on, or
So
looking
I'm
for work? Or?
I'm not married to any specific thing right now. If grad school is a good option when I graduate, then I'll definitely do that. Maybe a fall start. If not, I was offered a job at the USDA for a temporary position working at an oyster hatchery, which I think is really cool. I'm going to a research conference this October where I'll be shopping around for jobs and or grad school. So whichever sounds the coolest, I guess, is what I'll go with.
That'd be a great opportunity.
Oh yeah, I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow. So you just keeping an open mind, which is great. Yeah, see what
I'm not too picky. I just want to do something with my degree.
Awesome. That's great. So you're here on the Two Cat Kitchen because you're going to help us with a topic that I think listeners will be interested in. And we know each other from a class here at URI that explored the topic of endangered species, which is something that I think is in the news a bit. And you're going to help us kind of get to that topic and explain a little bit about it. And we're going to do that in just 1 minute. We'll be right back. We're back, and Alex, you're going to help us learn a little bit about endangered species. So, you've heard about, people I think have heard about endangered species, maybe in the news or from other people, but it's one question that I have is, what exactly is an endangered species?
Great question. So an endangered species is a plant or an animal that is likely to go extinct in a relatively short period of time from now.
Oh, okay. So they're in danger of going extinct.
Exactly.
Oh, nice. But the way I understood it is that most species on Earth undergo extinction as a part of like natural evolution. Do you know what's the average span of existence of a species on Earth?
So the average span of existence of a species is like 1 to 2 million years, give or take. Depends on the species, absolutely. Like that was for mammals. But fun fact, only like 2 to 4% of all the species that have ever lived during our 600 million years of Earth's fossil record still are around today, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, so in other words, like naturally a species is going to go extinct after 1 to 2 million years.
Yeah, it's part of evolution, yeah.
Okay.
But what we're talking about for endangered species and why it's such an issue is because recent evidence has suggested that species are facing extinction at a much faster rate than they should be, primarily because of human activities that have led to degradation of species habitat or their climate that they're in, and it can cause harm to that species directly.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. And just to be clear, so when we talk about species, like a species is something like a polar bear, right? Mm-hmm. Or
a fish.
Or
an
a
ant,
particular fish.
Or a particular fish. Or
like, what's a particular fish? What fish did you study last summer?
I studied brook trout,
Brook
which
trout.
aren't
so
endangered.
A brook trout is a species.
Right.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So who keeps track of whether a species is endangered?
Yeah, so the worldwide, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, uses a subjective set of criteria to determine a species' conservation status or how likely it is to go extinct. So the IUCN maintains this thing called a red list of species threatened with extinction, which is the most comprehensive assessment of endangered species globally, which is really cool. Many countries also have assessed endangered species within their own borders, and they have their own laws to protect those species. So, for example, the U.S. uses the Endangered Species Act, Canada uses the Species at Risk Act, which both do help to protect the species determined to be at risk of extinction.
Oh, okay, that's great. So there's a lot of organizations looking at endangered species, which is great. So how many endangered species are there in the world?
Yeah, so the IUCN lists about 45,000 species threatened with extinction, and which is 28% of all of the assessed species on that list. Here in the U.S., there's about 1,300 species listed as endangered under our Endangered Species Act.
Wow, that seems like a lot, but I know there's a lot of species in general in the world. But what happens after a species becomes endangered?
So there are a lot of organizations globally that work to improve the conservation status of an endangered species to help them be less vulnerable to extinction. So under the Endangered Species Act in the U.S., the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is tasked with developing a plan to recover the listed species or make sure it's no longer in danger of extinction.
Oh, okay, so they come up with a plan, but what specific things do these organizations do to help protect endangered species?
So it depends on the species. Just like different people need different types of help, different species also need different types of help when it comes to the threat of extinction. This can include not allowing hunting for that species or restricting land development in areas where that species lives. And more extensive conservation efforts include things like captive breeding programs and habitat restoration.
Oh, captive breeding programs. Yeah, I've heard about those. How do they work to help endangered species?
So a lot of the time, they happen in places like zoos, where a couple of individuals of a species are bred under controlled conditions, and offspring are then released back into the wild to supplement for natural populations.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's really interesting. Can you tell us about a species that maybe was once endangered but is no longer in peril because of the activities that these organizations have taken?
Yeah, so I think the most iconic example I could give here is the bald eagle, which once ranged throughout every state in the Union except for Hawaii. And when America adopted the bald eagle as its national symbol in 1782, as many as 100,000 nesting eagles lived in the United States, which is a lot.
That's a lot,
so
yeah.
early on, eagles were shot on a regular basis because they were perceived as threats to livestock, right? And also the salmon population because it was part of their food. And bounties were given to eagle carcasses. So
Oh, that's crazy to think
yeah,
that, huh?
so
back
people
in-
were being paid to kill bald eagles, so obviously people would go out and kill more of them.
And that's before people really had a full understanding of nature, I guess, and how ecosystems work.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So the decline of the bald eagles led to the passage of the Bald Eagle Protection Act, which outlawed killing and outlawed killing eagles and also the disturbing of them, as well as the possession of eagle parts, including feathers, eggs, nests, which you also have for a lot of other birds at the moment as well. The numbers of eagles continued to decline though. So in 1963, only 417 nesting pairs were found in the lower 48.
Wow, so in spite of that Protection Act,
in spite of it, exactly.
Yeah, they still went down.
Yeah, so 417 is not a very big number. We can get into genetic bottlenecking, so that's a huge problem with such a low amount of nesting pairs.
So what was going on?
So this led to being one of the first species listed under the Endangered Species Act that we have here in the U.S. So conservationists determined that the primary cause of the decline was this pesticide DDT, which caused their eggshells to become super easily to break, which obviously would kill the baby eagle.
Yeah, so they couldn't reproduce. Wow.
Exactly. So the DDT was banned from the use in the U.S. in 1972 in the U.S. and then also by 73 in Canada. So, which made it possible for eagles to recover, and this program was thought to be successful. Is thought to be successful.
Wow. That's great. What were some of the recovery efforts other than banning the DDT? Were there some other things that they did?
Yeah. So it includes habitat protection and releasing of bald eagles from artificial nests in hack towers that help increase their population size. So that captive breeding that we were talking about.
Oh, okay. Exactly. Wow. That's pretty cool.
So,
and how many are there today, do they think?
Yeah, so the Bald Eagle Protection Act in the U.S. is now estimated at having more than 300,000 individual bald eagles, which is so much more than 417 nesting pairs, which includes now 71,400 nesting pairs.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. So this has made it so that the bald eagles are no longer on the endangered species list, which is a huge win for bald eagles.
Wow, that's great. And just to wrap things up, this is the Two Cat Kitchen, after all, and I've heard that cats may have an impact on some endangered species, but not necessarily in a positive way. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, so domestic cats, which I have 3 on my own, are instinctively hunt. They're hunting animals, of course. So specifically in Hawaii, there's a huge problem with domestic cats. And what they're doing is they're killing the birds, because on instinct, these cats, domestic or not, or feral rather, will kill birds. And because they don't have a sense of which bird they're killing, all they know is that's a bird that's part of my diet. We are having some huge issues with endangered birds being killed by cats.
Oh, okay. It's because they don't discriminate between...
Exactly. They don't know that they're killing endangered birds. They just know that that's part of their food source.
Yeah, and I know that you mentioned there's no eagles in Hawaii, but there are a lot in Hawaii. There's a lot of endangered birds.
Yeah.
Hawaii has a lot of endangered species in general, I think I heard once. And is the cat problem really prevalent in Hawaii?
In Hawaii, absolutely it is, yeah. So it being an island and with different island biology than there is on continents, there's not a lot of places for the birds to really hide. If the cats are all over the island, these birds already have such a small habitat when compared to birds in the lower 48.
Yeah.
So there's this one bird, the name slips me, that only lived on one side of this one mountain that were being affected by these birds.
Cats.
By these cats, I'm sorry.
No kidding. Wow, so it's a real issue in some areas. Well, we don't like to think bad things about cats, but the cats don't know.
They don't know that they're being bad.
They're not being purposefully bad. Except maybe in a song that we have coming up, which is about bad cats, and in particular, bad kitties.
They might be here and they might be there.
They might be found most anywhere. Hanging in the shadows, just doing their thing. Waiting just to see what the twilight brings. You can see them coming from a mile away. You see them swing and you see them sway. Moving with a shuffle and light on their feet. Moving to the rhythm of the feline beat. Bad kitties,
They got some charm,
bad kitties,
but they're doing some harm.
they gather round, dance and sing. Makes you wanna cry, it's such a beautiful thing. Looking for trouble all over town. Looking for trouble when the sun goes down. They see a bird coming and they know what to do. They see a bird coming, it's a beautiful view. Bad kitties,
They prefer a nice bird.
bad kitties,
At least that's what I've heard.
they gather round, dance and sing. Makes you wanna cry, it's such a beautiful thing. They don't need to chase no mice around, 'cause they know just the spot where birds are found. When the cats are around, you know it's bad news. When the cats are around, the birds are singing the blues. Hanging by the window, at least that's a start. Better than hanging at the mini mart. Bad kitties,
One leads to two,
bad kitties,
and two just won't do.
they gather round, dance and sing. Makes you wanna cry, it's such a beautiful thing. That's all we have time for in this episode of the Two Cat Kitchen.
We'd like to thank our special guest, Martina Muller.
And our special guest with the Coconotes, Alex Thiboutot.
I'm Rick McKinney.
And I'm Sarah Grady. Join us next time right here at the
Two Cat Kitchen.
Midway.